Hi there, my name is FixFox and welcome back to Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Today is going to be just a little bit of a fun video, kind of like a little one-off that I've been thinking about that I could pull together pretty quickly, but all the same, it's about one of the more interesting aspects of Heroes of Might and Magic 2, maybe one of the aspects that really captures you and pulls you in, makes you want to stick around, and you don't even realize it's there. You don't even really look and notice. That is, of course, the artwork, the sprites, all hand-drawn, beautifully done, and I want to slow things down. In real time, some of these sprites, some of these animations can get lost. I wanted to show you a few of these sprites that I noticed that I found very, very interesting. Note that I did do a little bit of research on this, and I looked through some old forums and I found some of this information, so I knew in some places where to look. There's lots of information out there on the internet. I hope that you look towards those, and thank you for all the people that have done the work, not only to rip these sprites off from the original game, but also to help me know where to look. With that being said, let's dive right in. We're starting off here with the one and only the Cyclops. Now, pretty interesting with the Cyclops as a unit. I love that you can notice that he has a green eye. That was one of the things that somebody else noticed on one of the forums. That one little pixel right there, if you dive way in, it's green. And it holds true for all of the different frames that you're going to see for the Cyclops. Notice the whites of the eyes for the Cyclops does turn colors. Whenever the eye beam is being used, it goes from white into more of a yellow. I find that pretty darn interesting as well. And actually, if I look back at any of these other ones, again, that's going to hold true. The green eye, and then of course, yellow instead of just the whites of the eyes. Just pretty funny how that works. And the last thing I do want to point out is that for a creature that only has one eye, they did an awful good job of making sure that there was some intrigue and especially some facial types of, expressions. Something about this kind of lowered eye, it looks like the Rock. He's doing just like the one eye kind of tilt at you. Yeah, that looks pretty darn good. Way to put some expression into a creature that doesn't traditionally have a lot of expression with those eyes. Moving on, we do have the Orc. First thing to note about the Orc is that this weapon here is a little bit interesting. The crossbow does have a bit of a longer butt or stock to it. That kind of gets lost when I'm just playing the game, but when it's here right in front of me, right before me, the stock does look a little bit interesting. It probably is more functional in real life, but for a game, I just hadn't really noticed it. I always kind of assumed that it flowed into maybe like a sheath for a dagger, but of course, when you reload that crossbow, you can always obviously see what you're looking at there. And the other thing I want to point out, and this is going to be a little bit of a recurring theme, is what happens when a ranged creature goes into melee. For the Orc, you can see that he's got two hands on the crossbow pretty much, and then the furthest hand is going to slip away as the crossbow lowers, and from behind his back, the Orc is going to pull out a little dagger. He's going to use that to shank you and to stab you. And then, of course, after he completes that stabbing animation, he's more or less going to cycle back through the sprites the other way, through the animations, more or less to put that dagger away. So pretty fun stuff. I'm going to be focusing on that quite a bit, I do imagine. I did want to point out that for the Ogres and the Ogre Lords, I didn't realize this, maybe you did, but they do have a sort of a cap or maybe like a helmet that they're wearing. It's definitely a gray type of deal. They do have their horns that could more or less get in the way, but they do just have this maybe chin strap into a headpiece, and that's kind of nifty. If you don't really focus in on it, it's kind of difficult to see. If you move on to the Orcs have a very interesting animation that is sometimes lost upon people. Say that the Orc has just thrown away their rock, and what do you do? Where do you get one? The rocks just kind of focus really hard, and they start small, and then a ball of lights gets bigger and bigger until an actual full-on rock appears. And then they just grab the rock and then they're ready to lock and load for another day. So the trolls are more or less magical, and it's pretty interesting because the trolls actually have some of the most animations out of any creatures. If you look at their sprite sheet, their character sheet, it's really very massive. Not a lot of people have sprite sheets as big as the Orcs do, but between their melee animations, which aren't really nifty to look at, and between their throwing animations and between the animation that brings just their ammunition back to them, it is a lot of different frames that have to be animated more or less by the game engine. So the Orcs have a pretty nifty bit in history because of that. And also, by the way, their projectile is actually the exact same projectile that you'll find for the catapult. There's basically two rocks, and there's this one that faces this way, and then there's another rock where I guess you could more or less take this, copy and paste it, and then just like roll it out and just rotate it, and it looks something closer to that. Basically, there's two sprites, and so then you get the alternating sprite, one right on top of the other, where it'll go like on, off, on, off, on, off, and it'll make it look like the ball or the projectile is being thrown and it's rolling as it's going through the air. So kind of nifty stuff there. Next up, I gotta point this out here. The wolf is one of the coolest units, and it's amazing how a lot of units in their death animations, they're gonna get a look of surprise. This wolf looks surprised, like, oh my gosh, and they put so much emotion into these sprites, as unfortunately these poor creatures die. But the wolf here, looking very sad, very shocked, very, very surprised at their own demise. And then I've never really looked at the wolf a whole ton. This frame right here, this is like the traditional standing wolf. This is what you see. Doesn't look all that special. It looks kind of meh to me. But every other moving frame, every other bit of animation looks so cool, especially the attacking animations. Look at these. These are beautiful. That is some scary stuff going on there. And so it's a bit of a shame because it is kind of a blink and you'll miss it sort of deal. But when you slow it down, the wolf actually looks ferocious. Whereas if you just focused on this one little bit, you're going to feel a little bit underwhelmed by how cool the wolf really is. Here we've got the Rangers, and by the way, this is something that was pointed out in the most recent Fix Fox short. I mentioned that the Rangers are actually women. They're the only female troop in the whole army for the Knight faction, and you can tell with their long hair, their beautiful faces, that these are in fact warrior women, both the archers and the Rangers. And it's pretty nifty to see the way that they draw their arrows. They do go straight to their quiver on their back, they pull it out, notch the arrow, and then off they fire. And then much like other creatures, I'm very interested in the way that they do their melee. Look, they've got their dagger tucked into their boot. You can always see the dagger tucked right in there, but you never really notice, even when they're attacking, they crouch down to this position so that way they can grab the knife, pull it up, unsheath it, and then proceed to stab whatever is right in front of them. And then of course they have to basically do the same thing to put it away. But very cool that they have to go into this motion right there to get the dagger from their boot. Next up is a very interesting thing that many people have known about, especially if you know about the F-Heroes 2 project. You know that some of the sprites got a little bit messed up. Your eyes do not deceive you. This is a cavalry, not a champion, but a cavalry. And during the death animation, he gets promoted very briefly to a champion, and then he immediately dies. As of course he dies, the horse goes down, the knight falls off of the horse, and then it looks like the knight goes behind the horse, and then the main, what you see on the battlefield after all is said and done, is basically the majority of the horse with the broken sort of lance. Pretty interesting that if I am to do Resurrection or Resurrect True, that lance does get repaired in backwards. But of all the creatures, this is kind of one of the more noteworthy types of fixes that the F-Heroes 2 project has done, just to make things look even nicer than ever before. Otherwise, not a whole lot going on with the cavalry, but you don't see that blue come on anywhere else except for that one frame in the death animation. So pretty nifty stuff there. Moving on, we do have the Paladins and the Crusaders. I do just want to, which is your favorite? The Crusader or the Paladin? Crusader or Paladin? There's a lot of these units where I could have shown one or the other. The Ogre Lords, for example, versus the Ogres. I could show one of these creatures or the other, but it's basically just a reskin. Occasionally what you're going to find is a few slight changes that have to do with actual structure, but most of the time it just has to do with color. For example, in this instance, you can see the gem here kind of at the hilt of the sword here. It will change color from like a light blue to more of a darker blue to help it pop out amongst the blue cape and the gold. But maybe some of the red here, the kind of the more pinkish. But in general, a lot of these units are more or less reskinned, and just kind of nifty to note that the skinning and the animations are going to be the same from playthrough to playthrough, from bit to bit. Crusaders and Paladins are basically a 1-to-1 in their animations. The only reason why we're seeing double here is because the spriter, the person who ripped it, just had it off on the character sheet by just a little bit. In this instance, it looks like it is Cyrus Annihilator, and this was probably quite some time ago that they ripped this. There's a couple of different people that have ripped for Heroes of Might and Magic 2. By the way, all of this information and all these character sheets and things like this, you can get this off of the Spriters resource. I would just Google Spriters resource, SPRITERS resource, and you can find a lot of different games on there, Heroes of Might and Magic just being one of them. Going into the skeleton, I don't know if you've probably noticed this, but it's kind of cool how they break apart when they die. The head separates from the body, and then this little arm starts to fall off, an arm, and as they fall backwards, they fall into a heap of bones, and that's pretty darn cool. They do have a little bit of blood on their, I don't know what you call that, a scimitar. But pretty nifty to see that it's present throughout all of the different skeleton models, all the different animations as well. On to the mummy. The mummies are pretty darn cool, and they're another one of those creatures that is basically a reskin from one to the other, whether you're doing the royal mummies or just the mummies. But a couple things to point out. Number one, this face for this mummy is a forward face where you can actually see a mouth. You can actually see that there's eyes. Otherwise, you can usually just kind of imagine it's one little eye barely poking out. But this kind of gives you, I don't know, a swamp creature kind of a look here. Kind of nifty. Maybe that's just the best way the artist could do the face straight on instead of to the side, but pretty nifty how they do that. And then whenever the mummy attacks, this is pretty nifty. Look at the eyes. You got the red sprite instead of the yellow one. So when the mummies attack, they do get angry. That's a good example, just on a side-by-side. And of course, their hand does glow, just to let you know that they are mean in business. Lastly, and there's another forward face. It looks like the one arm is wrapped up, and so they only really ever do have one arm free. It's not that this arm is cut off, it's just that it's laying over and then it was wrapped across. And then of course, the final thing that's worth noting is that with the death animation of the mummies, they kind of unravel as they do so, and you actually get to see the skeleton or what was ever under the wrapping of the mummy. And it's pretty cool. It looks like yellowed and decayed bones, and it looks like the bones more or less turn into dust as this pile of wrappings falls to the ground. So cool. So cool. And you get the idea in real time what's happening, but it's always fun to see it in slow-mo like this. You could actually see the king or the pharaoh or whoever was under all that wrapping. Moving on to the vampires and the vampire lords, another one of those cases where they're reskinned, just turning into the vampire, or rather the bat, is kind of weird, because you go from, blah, ready to go, into this kind of half-formed, half-bat, half-vampire looking thing, and then you get into this bat that will fly across the battlefield for you, and then turn back into a vampire before it actually attacks. But this thing is made of nightmares. This thing is just a little scary for me. My word. Whoever drew that, oh geez. They need to take a nap real bad. And then when the vampire lords die, well, when they get attacked, they do kind of go into this motion where they bring the cloak up just to shield themselves in a defensive kind of position. But if they die, they go from that cloak position into slowly turning into dust. And then you can see it's a full-on skeleton, just, 2-3 frames where the flesh or whatever peels off of their faces, and they just fall in a little heap of dust. And that's all that's remaining. Super cool. Super cool. By the way, very interesting that for all of these death animations, this versus the royal mummy, I mean, they're both basically a spot on the floor, right? Like that to that is basically almost the same thing minus the coloring. But it's pretty interesting how if you've played Heroes of Might and Magic for pretty much any length of time, you'll see these and immediately recognize what's left in the event that you needed to like reanimate dead or cast a resurrection for some of the alive units, you immediately recognize the corpse that you'll find on the ground and littering the battlefield. Earlier I mentioned that some of the units do have some differences in their actual structure. Let's take a quick look at the Lich. Now the Lich actually has a crown with 1, 2, 3 points, and it looks like it's just right atop their head. They've got the pendant around their neck. That's going to stay the same. The boots and the coloring is going to change a little bit. The purple cape is really what's going to stay the same. But if you look from the Liches into the Power Liches, you're going to see immediately that they get taller. And the reason that they're getting taller is because their crown is actually changing in a pretty big way. The crown gains an extra level of height, and maybe you could look at it as perhaps depth. This sprite seems really, really wrong to me. But then again, maybe that's the artist's best description of what the crown looks like as the Lich faces more to the forward instead of to the side with the profile. Whatever the case is, these Liches do get an upgrade. They get more kingly when they become Power Liches. How about when they attack? They will have this kind of firework display here. This is, funny enough, the exact same animation, the exact same sprites you will find when a catapult attacks a castle. It's the exact same. It starts small and then gets just like a little bit bigger over time. So exact same animation, whether you are doing a catapult or whether you're doing a Lich. And then it's also the same animation, whether you are going to launch a ranged attack or just do damage to a melee type of unit. Either way, the Lich is going to have the same basic animation as they fall to the dirt. On to Bone Dragons. I've got to include every frame of these Bone Dragons. Oh my goodness. The artists did such a nice job. So the standing animation, I think that we've all seen that plenty of times. The flying animation, they've got these wings, and I don't know what to make about the wings, because the implication here, if they're just bone left, is that the wings have to be bone or maybe like cartilage, something that would stick around. You know, I mean, when we talk about dragons, usually we're saying something like, oh, they have leathery wings. But whatever this is that's helping the dragons fly, it is a full-on material. Is it straight up bone? Maybe, maybe not. Tough to say, but it is something to look after. And as we're looking at this and just seeing how cool these creatures are, one person online did note that there is more fingers on these bone dragons' hands than are on normal dragons' hands. And so maybe these are a different type of dragon from a bygone era. Prehistoric dragons, as it were, that the necromancers have pulled back alive, in the same way that a necromancer might walk into a museum and look at a picture of a dragon, or rather those dinosaur bones, and then they might want to reanimate those. Maybe some Liches in Heroes of Might and Magic 2 saw some Heroes of Might and Magic 1 dragons. I don't know, tough to say. This dragon is probably the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. Oh my goodness. That's so cool. And also, very, very important for me to note here, the bone dragons, for whatever reason, have 2 dying animations. I don't know why. There's no other creature that I've seen that has 2 different dying animations. Of course, creature, you get hit with the bone dragons and it starts here, and then slowly they kind of crumble. And as they crumble here, you're going to see that it's more or less going to be the head is the last thing standing as the rest of you falls down, and then the head will follow shortly after into this kind of pile of bones. So the skeleton head is going to be the last thing to fall, and then the lights are going to go out and the red eyes are going to disappear. But here's the deal. You have all of this going on, and then you have this going on, which is very, very similar, except this time, like, the bone dragon's taking a step back, and this animation it's taller as it falls, and the head falls into the pile of bones in a different way. There's the lights going out, going from a red pupil down to more of a dark red. But I don't know why there's 2 separate dying animations for the bone dragons. Now, it's possible that these sprites are a little bit mismatched. Maybe they're supposed to intermingle together in a better way than it's presented here, but I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of overlap and doubled up animations here. And that's pretty nifty. I'm pretty sure, in my personal opinion, there are 2 sets of dying animations for the Bone Dragons. Let me know if you think I'm accurate on that or not. Let me know if you can figure out any reason why there would be 2 separate dying animations for these great winged beasts. Look at that. If you're looking for a tattoo idea, I'm not much of a tattoo type of guy myself, but if you are, that might be it. Moving on to the ghosts, it felt like I should probably kind of pull some of the neutral creatures as I'm going through here, by the way. And the ghosts are mostly just scary. There's nothing interesting in my mind. Maxim, by the way, ripped this one. But they just look so scary. Their dying animation is super cool. It looks like they're kind of getting, like you have a leaf blower and you're just kind of blowing away parts of them into small little bits as they die, and then they crumple into a heap on the ground. Just super scary when they're moving. And they're actually, ghosts are, one of the different types of units that has some additional work going on with the sprites during the game. And I'll explain what that is basically right now. So these are the fire elementals. These are, where are you? The genies. Okay, so you got the fire elementals, well, you have the ghosts, you got the fire elementals, you got the genies, right? If you notice, when you pull up Heroes Might and Magic 2, which I happen to have loaded up here, some of these creatures are doing this kind of dance, like the genies are not staying just strictly in place. That's number one. They're bouncing around a little bit. That's got to be the game engine working with the sprites that are being delivered. Number two, these 3 creatures have some interesting glowing sprites going on. Genies, Phoenix, and fire elementals have this kind of glowing, pulsating sort of thing going on here. And if you look at the actual spriter sheets, I'm pretty darn sure that it's not represented in the frames. That effect is not being achieved by frame by frame by frame by frame sprite work. If I copy and pasted these genies on top, for example, their little tail here, the sprites line up, like they match. And so I'm pretty sure that there's something in the game engine that is very specifically making sure that certain creatures get a little bit of extra attention. Number one, as they're moving up and down on the battlefield to simulate that they're flying or that there's some movement in that direction, but also for these kind of special particles, like the Phoenix feathers, like the fire elementals pulsating with their lava rocks, and then the genies. Genies, by the way, cool attack here. The F Heroes 2 team has mentioned, many people have mentioned that it'd be super cool if there was some additional sprite work on the attack from the genie that will reduce the stack by half. There's a 10% chance that when the genie attacks, that their attack is going to half the stack instead of doing your normal damage. It'd be cool if instead of, I don't know, instead of like red flames, you did something like blue flames or blue fire. I don't know. You get the idea. The idea being that you did something to differentiate these genies' attacks when they got that special 10% chance to happen. Nifty stuff. But especially I wanted to point out for the genies, fire elementals, and in part for the ghosts, because they also bump up and down, that the game engine has to be doing something with that because it's not represented in the sprites. Anyway, moving on to the Medusa. Medusa death is pretty interesting to me for this reason. Oh no, the Medusas died. And as they die, the snakes in their hair disappear. They abandon the Medusa and they just wriggle away. And now you have a Medusa without any hair. Super funny how the actual snakes in the Medusa's hair are backing up and just getting out of there. I can't tell you how much I love that. It just, you go from this to that. That's just funny. Somebody put some real attention into that work. For the sprites, the biggest thing I want to point out here is kind of the way that their attack works. The attack for the sprites looks like it focuses just on the power coming from the middle of their wings and then radiating out. And they've got this kind of blue lightning effect, this blue lightning attack. And then if they're pointing down, you still get to see that from the back end. And you just still get that effect, which is pretty cool. No matter which way they're pointing, you're going to get the sprites doing something nifty there. Their flying pattern looks pretty good. Nothing else is really standing out to me. Nothing that I really need to point out. The melee attack for the elves and the grand elves is really nice because they've got this little sword, little dagger on the side of their belt. And when they have to be defending themselves in close quarters combat, they'll reach for the dagger, pull it out. And they actually do, like, if you look, a little bit of a flip. These guys are pretty good with their dagger because they go from having the blade pointed down to pointed up. Like, and if you're going to make that happen, you more or less have to flip the knife, use the inertia, and then reclasp the knife. And that's pretty much what they're doing from here. Pointed down, and then they pull it up into a held position like this. So pretty nifty how they do that, going from here or here to here. Yeah, it takes a lot of effort. If you got the right knife, it's easier, but these elves, I feel like they should do bonus damage with their melee attack just because of that. The grand elves have got really neat dying animation. Of course, you've probably noticed this. They do sort of the Star Wars Jedi approach. They just phase out of existence while their cloaks fall to the ground. And kind of like with the trolls summoning their own new rock, it starts off small, but their attack builds until it's a full-on energy beam that they then get to throw. Although I noticed this, and maybe I'm going crazy here, maybe I'm not, but there's a couple of different animations for that. I wondered if, when are these ones used? These darker baubles, these darker energy attacks. It's not that it's darker, it's just that it's less bright. Here, it's very much a bright yellow that's illuminating their body, and then over here, it's just more of an orange. I'm just not sure why this is orange, but that's yellow. Maybe that makes sense to you as I'm explaining it, maybe it doesn't. Unicorns, every time they walk, everywhere they go, their horn does kind of do a little fancy glow, but especially as they attack, just how beautiful is that? Just the use of the sprites, use of the sparkles, and they create a lot of movement just with their actions, their horns, and then the implied movement from the way that the sparkles start and then stop. And then unfortunately, the death animation for the unicorns always gets me because they get hit, they go back, and then like they open their eyes and go, oh no, this is happening. And then they fall down in a heap. And all you see is unicorn, their horns sparkling until the very last frame where they lay their head down. Very sad. Unless you don't like the sorceresses. Speaking of sorceresses though, the Phoenix here, this is another example of how the sprites on the Spriters page does not capture the color change. Let me go back one more time just so you can see what I'm talking about here. In this section over here, if I'm looking at the Phoenix and just the Phoenix, it's all about that nifty movement. And I love that coloring. The coloring is beautiful as it goes from the ends of the feathers to the outs, and that's just not represented in the sprites. The feathers on the body change and they just have that nifty movement. Again, it's not represented in the actual Spriters sheet. Maybe that's something to do with the actual ripping process. I don't know much about it, but from what I can tell, it wasn't manually hand drawn in with the sprites, just cycling back and forth from option A to option B. Otherwise, let's see. Their death animation's a little bit nifty. As you look at them, they take the hit, they start to turn into sparkles. And as they do so, they turn into even more sparkles. More, and they're slowly phasing out of existence. And then you've just got what looks like a plucked chicken here, basically remaining before they're finally disappearing entirely. Someone pointed out that it looks like the eye is one of the last things to really disappear. But whatever the case is, at the very end, you only have a little pile of sparkles. Again, if you like the sorceresses, you hate that. If you don't like the sorceresses, you don't mind. Centaurs, this is their animation for when they need to pull out their knife. They just reach back, grab it, pull it, and pop somebody with it. Otherwise, their hands are just kind of more to their side. So it's really not a big motion from, like in this case here, as they're walking animation. It's not a lot to go from hand at the side near the knife anyway into actually reaching back for the knife. So it probably fades fairly seamlessly into the animations as you go. Gargoyles have this light blue sprite that pops up when they're attacking, and that's actually not present anywhere else for them. They generally just have a white or a yellow eye as they're flying, as they're just standing, but when they attack, the eye turns blue, and they are shooting fire out of their eyes. I don't know why with the Griffin here. I just included the Griffin because I thought that they looked really, really interesting when they're in flight. When they're moving, they look very, very regal at all times. And actually, I'd wondered, specifically, I think about the bone dragons and some of the other creatures here. Maybe even specifically concerning, say, the rocks. I wanted to know if there was any overlap in the artistry, like if you tried to reuse some frames, if you tried to reuse some of the different artwork and just sort of repurpose it, reskin the artwork, and it doesn't look like they ever did. For example, if I go back to the bone dragon, oh gosh, where is the bone dragon? Don't do this to me. We've got to find the bone dragon. Wherever the bone dragon is. Here, no, here. Yeah, there it is. If I pull this over to the bone dragon, and I'm just kind of comparing the different structures, it looks like everything was done piece by piece, and creature by creature, unit by unit. This griffin does not look like it looks at all like any of these dragon animations. This is like an attack animation. Here's the one that I probably was looking at the most. Let me just hold on. Do here. You're getting to see all of FixFox's Photoshop skills. All on display. And so like this one, I kind of theorized, like, are these the same? Are these similar enough? And maybe it could be a matter of having the same artist doing the same stuff. This pose is very similar, but then again, if you're a flying creature with wings and you're attacking downward, I mean, how else do you draw this? You know, I mean, this is probably the best way that you can represent what's going on here. And so, I mean, even if there's some similarities, which I think that there's plenty of similarities, of course, you have enough differences that these are definitely their own units from piece to piece. And I just thought that that was very interesting to make sure that we're looking at this and just seeing where are the similarities and where maybe are the differences. And I'm very happy to see that there's nothing that looks like it's reused. This all looks like this was probably done on storyboards beforehand, and then they just checked to make sure that things flowed together and they were fine. And maybe, again, they took some inspiration, but they never copied. Way to go, graphical artists. You all amaze me very, very much. And that's part of the reason why we're trying to do this here today. Okay, Hydra was nifty, mostly for the attack animation. I mean, it's really fun to see, you know, the snakes are all generally facing the same direction until they attack, and then they just go wild. This head right here that's attacking more or less to the top is kind of fun because it looks like it's the flat top of the head, which is, probably a perspective you normally wouldn't see with the Hydra. And then as they finish their attack and the Hydras all come back together, all the different snake heads, they ultimately end up back in this kind of formation, but they really do a pretty big stretch as they attack. And then I gotta tell you, I love how cute this little Hydra is. Whenever they get attacked, they shrink down so far. They get so little. They just cower, these little snakes. And once again, with just a couple of sprites, you're able to convey in this death animation, like fear, surprise, shock. I mean, I'm picking up, I never thought you'd see a snake that looks afraid, but this is it. Absolutely. And especially when the traditional Hydra look is, I'm going to kill you and you're going to hate every second of it. Going from that to this, pretty impressive that you can do that as an artist. And then as they die, they just get real small and they just collapse into a little heap. So sad. So sad. Anyway, I don't have anything in particular to really point out with the dragons. This is just another example of looking at piece by piece, the artistry that goes into it. This pose with the flame breath is so powerful. It's so exciting. And as I go from green into red into black, you can tell that the yellow fringe stays the same from piece to piece. And other than just like the color changes, even the shading appears to be the same. I'm wondering if that means that the black dragons were done first, because the shading is the same, minus, I mean, you got your solid blacks and you got your lighter grays and your lighter whites. I don't know a lot about graphical artistry, but I do know that shading is very important to do when it's in black and white. And it would make sense to me that you would do the black and white first, and then from there, implementing the color into an already solid black and white design just makes a lot of sense to me. But then again, what do I know? On to the next. We do have the halfling. Pretty nifty here. The halflings actually hold on to this little rock the entire time. Unlike some of the other creatures that we've been talking about, they just hold on to their little rock and they just have a nice time. But like every other creature that is ranged and has a melee, they do something nifty. They'll put their rock away very quickly, as they also put away their sling, and then they just pop out with a dagger, just that quick. The rock just kind of disappears, and the hand that was kind of by their side goes back, sword appears, and then they pull it out to shank you. And as they load the stone, you can see they bring it up to the front, and there is no stone in their hand as they whip the sling around. Pretty nifty to note that there is, in fact, its own projectile. They don't use any other kind of projectile for the halfling attack. The boars are another case where the death animation, again, look at the shock, look at the surprise. This guy looks shocked that you just shot him with a bow. And then, while the boars usually look fairly happy, they've also got some feral pig to them, which is really kind of cool to see when they attack, because honestly, otherwise, what you're getting is a lot of kind of happy looking boars. That's a happy looking boar. This guy I don't want to mess with. Nope, not messing with this guy. The rocks, this was another case where I was trying to look directly and do a comparison between bone dragons, between the griffins, and again, this is pretty much just the best way you can kind of convey this downward attacking angle, in my opinion. Rocks have this beautiful kind of plumage that, as an artist, would probably take a long time to make sure you kind of get right. Look how detailed this is. That's a very beautiful, detailed sort of interplay between darks and lights in your colors in order to give it depth and to help you know what's going on. I've seen a lot of artwork, especially with birds, where it feels like people miss the anatomy in a way where I don't know what's going on. But here, it always feels like the birds especially, you really do know what's going on as the birds are moving across the battlefield. And one thing I've tried to look into, but I still need to do a little bit of work on, is figuring out exactly how the wing beats as these ranged creatures fly. If you're flying just one space forward, how does that differ from if you are flying across the entire battlefield? Because, certainly you got to flap your wings more times. What happens if you move an odd number of hexes versus an even number? How does the cycling work to make sure that the wing beats line up with that movement? I don't know. Maybe I'll look into that, and maybe I'll get back to you on another day. For the steel golem, they kind of break up. They have their arms fall off as their head more or less falls either into their body or behind them. And so by the time they're in this little pile, they're in at least 1, 2, 3 pieces, maybe more. Which is weird because it doesn't look like it here, but as you can see right there, they are in a little tiny chunk. Arc Magi and Magi are, again, another kind of one of those reskins, but I do want to just point out that the Magi, compared to the Arc Magi, they've got pretty much the exact same crescent moon shape pattern, but instead of being kind of black on white, it's light on dark. So the Magi have light moons with a dark background. The Arc Magi have dark moons with a light background. And of all the things to notice with the Magi is especially their attack and their dying. So when the Magi die, their little scepter here, it glows and it has sort of this like kind of pop. And right after they pop, it looks like they do the Jedi die sort of deal. And so some have theorized online, they have theorized that it's in fact the life force of the Magi that is in the gem. And if the gem dies, then so too does the Magi. Pretty interesting there. As you attack with the Magi, you have the glowing hand. You also have the sprites around the actual orb there, but less so, mind you, less so does your staff glow when you're doing a ranged attack. More so does the staff glow when you're actually just hitting somebody with it. For some reason, hitting somebody with your staff, that really needed to be accentuated for the graphical artist, which is pretty nifty. Yeah, very fun stuff there. And then the Giants and the Titans are basically the same, but one major difference with the Titans, as we're going to get to in 1 second, is that they do have a ranged attack that the Giants just don't have to worry about. Very cool that they have the lightning, the little sparkles to indicate that there's some extra special stuff going on. And then someone has pointed out that if you follow the face in the Giants and you follow it all the way down, you can still see it right here. It sort of looks like the Giants kind of look like the statue of the Legion from Heroes of Might and Magic 3. And as they go down, the face is still visible upon death. And there's not really much to differentiate it between. I mean, there's these white pupils here when they're alive. And then when they get hit and when they're starting to go down, the light goes out, nobody's home. And then you're just left with this little pile of heap with no glinting eyes. So moving on then to the Titan. A lot of the same animations, especially for the attacking, just like the melee type of attack. But then when you get into the throwing, man, these guys look like they belong in the Olympics. They need to be like javelin throwers or something. And this one's probably my very favorite. These two right here are probably my very favorite to look at, just with the stance, very athletic stance, and they're ready to mess you up. And so with that being said, folks, that's going to be the end of this video. These are all of the creatures that you'll find in Heroes of Might and Magic 2 and some of the nifty things that I liked to take a look at with their sprites. I'm probably going to take a look at in the near future some of the other different sprites, specifically more so than anything, more so the portraits. For example, the one thing that I really just want to point out to you is that there's an artifact in Heroes of Might and Magic 2, and it's Astra. And the artifact says that you free a sorceress from a tomb, and she rewards you with, I think, the arcane necklace. And so when I see tomb, and then in the background here, I see all this nifty stuff. I mean, I can't help but think it's got to be Astra. This looks like she is straight from the tomb, and that's probably the same sorceress. Very kind of interesting that they might have included some clues about these heroes' whereabouts, where they've come from, where they've been in the backgrounds. By the way, is that a goblin? Is that an elf? Is that an ogre from Heroes of Might and Magic 1? Is that Kaizen from Heroes 2 or from Heroes 1? Probably. So folks, we'll probably take a look at these portraits and some of the other nifty stuff later, another day, another time. But for now, just know that I'm grateful for the opportunity to have been here, to have talked with you about everything we got going on here today. Fun stuff. Look after you, look after your friends, look after your family. Until I see you again, take good care of those that care about you. My name is Fix Fox. Thanks for coming along with me on this journey. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.